Like the first two nights were okay, but then the third night, um, the winds picked up to like 55 miles an hour and it completely destroyed my tent. So I had to come back to the city and, just figure out what I was going to do after that. And then I ended up going, back out to a different part of the desert and, I stayed there until, um, Eric, Dingoni came out, the last three nights that I was out there. So and he brought a tent because before he came with his tent, I was just sleeping in the car. So like meditating in the driver's seat, sleeping in the back, hanging out near shade structures or like if there's large rock formations out there and you can get shade by rotating around the rock formations. Like you just have to be in the opposite position of where the sun is, or it just has to be in the shade, and you can get shade that way. So, but yeah, it was interesting. I think actually that like for your meditation to um deepen, if you're using a concentration object, it's actually important that you have less intensity with sense perceptions. So like if you're out there in the desert, I think the jungle is fine. But if you're out there in a place that has high wind or has significant amount of wind or like auditory disturbances or, um, physical sensation disturbances like that will affect your meditation. Like you might, yeah. Even, I actually didn't bring those, but even with those, like you preferably wouldn't sleep in them, right? But at night, the wind, the sound of the wind from the like smacking of the tent against the wind, like it wakes you up at least it wakes me up every couple hours. So it's like you might be better off actually just being like in an air conditioned situation. Your refrigerator's there, you make your food, you're very comfortable, it's very quiet, and you meditate 12 hours a day for your whole retreat. That may be better than going out to the desert, doing some crazy rough it out stuff where like you're trying to meditate, but at the same time you're at a war with the elements. You know, you're trying to meditate quietly, but you have these 35-mile-an-hour winds that are continually like, pulling you out of the depth of the meditation. So on one hand, you have the benefit of like connecting with the power of the elements. But on the other hand, you have the drawback of the fact that you're in survival mode. And that, yeah, exactly. Like what Dingoni, what Eric is saying, you're in survival mode. So, you're meditating, but then you come out of meditation, you're like, oh, is the tent going to make it? Is the tent going to make it? These winds are getting pretty strong. I'm starting to worry. Is this tent number 2 going to collapse? So you have situations like this when you're really in the elements. So I understand why like Zen retreats and meditation retreat programs in general, they just have everything handled for you. The food is taken care of. You don't have to worry about making food, finding food. The lodging, of course, is a normal cabin, so you don't have any, contact with extra contact with the elements. So yeah, but overall it was really good. I had like three OBEs. When Eric and I met up in person, he brought the tent and we were able to camp in the tent, and we did wake back to bed at like 4:35 in the morning. So we both woke up at the same time, and then we did a dream reentry or induction technique, and he actually had a lucid dream. So, and it was pretty cool because I don't think I'd ever done that with another person, where it's like we woke up at the same time and we actually did the induction or the OB exit. Because usually, if you're waking up that early, you're doing it alone. So at least in my life, yeah, but there was a night where, um, I was going between the desert. So like some days I would leave at night. I would leave the main desert area that I was staying at, which was like this off-roading place. Because after my tent was destroyed, I went back to the city and I got my car. I got my girlfriend's car. It's an SUV, and it had off-roading drive, so it could actually handle that terrain. So a couple of the days I left that area to go to a place called the Joshua Tree Retreat Center, and this was founded by a guy named Edwin J. Dingle a long time ago. I mean, a really long time ago. He created this center in like 1938 or something like that. It was registered as the first church of mystic Christianity in the United States. He lived for about 30 years in Asia, and he was a cartographer for the British Royal Society, and they wanted they wanted to create a comprehensive map of the terrain of China. So he actually walked across China on foot. So he wrote a book called Across China on Foot. It took him years to complete this. And during his time in China or in Asia, he ended up meeting teachers and he spent some time in Tibet. He was one of the first Westerners ever in Tibet. And so while he was there, he learned these breathing practices. And when he came to the United States, immigrated to the United States, he started teaching them here in a desert in Southern California. So he established that church in 38 and started teaching meditation and breathing practices almost 100 years ago in this region of Southern California. So on that site, like in this little on this land that he developed and turned into a meditation center, there are these energy vortexes. I guess there's some kind of earth energy or geomagnetic energy. So if you have these dowsing rods and you actually step into the vortex, the dowsing rods will start circulating. You know, you step out of the vortex and the dowsing rods stop. So dowsing rods are these little metal rods that people use to find underground sources of water. So if you just go out into the desert or wherever or mountains and you have these rods, you're looking for streams of water under the ground, and those streams will affect the magnetic energy and the rods will pick up on it. So these hub spots of magnetic circulation are really good for your health. And so those are identified on the mental physics property. So you can go and just meditate or stay in them, like hang out in the vortex. And yeah, so I did that I spent like 6 hours a day for probably 3 days in there, and then would drive back to the desert or drive back out to the solitude place and sleep there at night. So one of the nights, there's a kind of well, and this I'm not recording this purposely because I don't want this to actually I don't want this what I'm about to tell you to actually be recorded. So there's a kind of, if any of you have read Robert Monroe's Journeys Out of Body or the Journeys trilogy, there's a specific kind of dream that he began to experience in the second book. He calls them simulations. Most people call them simulations. So what happens is you have this dream, or you're in a dream environment where you're in some kind of, it's almost like an obstacle course, or it's a type of environment where there's a specific objective or there's a specific thing to be overcome. And if you elicit the incorrect responses, the dream literally starts over from the beginning and you go through the whole thing again. So I'll give you an example. I had a simulation type dream before I read the Journeys trilogy. I was in Thailand and I was ordained as a monk at the time. I was in this underground, like an underground parking garage, and the whole thing's dark. It's very creepy. and there's this little demon, like about 4 feet high in front of me. And the thing starts running towards me. And at first I tried to send loving kindness to it and like, mitigate it or calm it down. And then it killed me. So that didn't work. The dream repeated from the beginning. The thing was 20 feet ahead of me again, and it started running towards me again. And so this time I tried the next thing, which was to, fight it. I tried fighting, tried fighting the entity, and that didn't work either. It also defeated me in that case. Rewind again from the beginning. It's 20 feet ahead. It's running towards me again. And then, uh, as it's leaping towards me, I have the idea, okay, I'm going to open my mouth and just eat it. So my mouth opens like 3 feet wide and I just swallow this demon and I eat him up. And as soon as that happens, like a snap of a finger, I become lucid. So lucidity is triggered. The entire energy, feel, appearance of the dreamscape in the parking garage completely changes. It like the color turns on, the lights turn on essentially, and this screen appears in the dreamscape. And I walk up to the screen and the screen says like, it actually gives me a lesson, like a very important lesson. It says to me that this inner voice or this inner source of intuition that most people hear as a child, this voice that tells you or has told many of us that we can do great things or that we have great potential. That source of like happiness and love for children. It's like this inner voice and this inner source. The screen was telling me that all people still have this voice. They still have this intuition, but it gets covered and obstructed by all the other voices that we hear and that we begin to accept as being true as we get older and progress through life. It also gets drowned out by the various hurtful or negative, difficult experiences that we have. And then by the time we're 25 or by the time we're 30, we're totally disconnected from that inner voice of intuition. And, a lot of people are just wandering through life. So when this screen spoke to me, it had the same voice that I used to hear as a kid, which was very profound because I hadn't heard that. There are many times in my life where I took a certain direction or I did something that was very unusual because I had this inner calling or I had this inner whisper to go and do that. When I was 17, going on 18, I just graduated high school. I found this lucid dreamer guy on YouTube that some friends had introduced me to. His name was Reese Jones. And I listened to Reese talk about his lucid dreaming experiences and some of the things that he had gone through. And I just had this conviction in my mind right then and there. I was like, I have to meet this guy. I don't know how, but I have to meet this guy. So I messaged him. This is in the early YouTube days when you could still message, so you could still message people directly. And I said, hey, I'm going to come meet you. I don't know why, but it's just something that I feel that I have to do. And he's like, sure, man, come up, whatever. And so I disassembled my bike, put it in a box, got on a Greyhound bus, went to San Francisco, left my parents a letter saying I'm going to be back in 2 weeks or something like that. Don't call the police. And I got to San Francisco. I reassembled the bike and I biked like 300 miles until I got to this guy. Biked, took buses, public transportation, slept on the side of roads. There's like a space between the freeway and residential properties that homeless people usually sleep in. So I would sleep there, or I slept in parks all the way until I got to this guy. And when I got to him, I told him the whole story, like the journey. And he was like, wow, that's crazy, dude. Let's make a video right now and you can put this on my YouTube channel. And then, I can start a YouTube channel. I'll create the channel for you right now. And then, you can get, some of my subscribers because this is a really interesting thing that you did. And it's very commendable. So that was the beginning. And like Eric, who's here, and a couple other people who are in the chat, they know me from back then because I had a YouTube channel 12 years ago where I was making lucid dreaming and astral projection videos. After my dad passed away and I went to Thailand or went to Asia to do meditation training, in the context of the new things that I learned and the new approaches I was doing, I was like, I just want to get rid of this channel. I just want a fresh slate. And, so I did that. But this whole journey and that whole phase of my life was sparked by this voice, this intuition, this instinct that came from deep inside me, this calling, and I followed it. So that voice of that calling was the same voice that was speaking to me through this dream in the dreamscape so many years later. I mean, like a decade later. And so the nature of this particular dream was that the dreamscape is attempting to have you elicit a certain response. If you elicit the correct response, the challenge ends. If you don't elicit the correct response, the dream repeats itself again and again. So Robert Monroe in his Far Journeys, once he finally hands over the out-of-body state, like in the first book, he's exploring the world, he explores the solar system, and at some point he gets bored and he says, I've done everything that I could do. I've seen everything in this world that I've wanted to see using out-of-body experience. I mean, what is there to do now? And so in the second book, he just surrenders and he says, he just hands it over to, he doesn't even know what. He calls it his total self. And he allows the OBEs to be guided from that point on. He's not directing them himself. When he does that, the experiences take on an entirely new, like he goes to the next level of out-of-body experience. And that is what characterizes his second book, the discoveries that he made, the beings that he meets, the aspects of his own structure that he discovered. That all begins in the second book. It began when essentially he surrendered and said, I'm done directing the state. Whatever is guiding it, he handed over the keys to that force. In the third book, he discovers what this force actually is. And he calls it the I there, which is another word for his total self. In the traditional yoga and generally spiritual teachings, when we hear about higher self, or when we hear people describe their experiences with higher self, it's usually described in the form of cosmic consciousness. Like a person has an experience of unifying or experiencing union with the whole universe. And the consciousness that they experience or call the higher self or the Atman or the I am. These are all the same words for this particular level of what we are. Those experiences are almost always cosmic in nature. So the experience is formless, timeless, and non-local. So one of the things people describe, for example, in these higher self level OBEs is experiencing vast distances of space simultaneously, or being able to process vast amounts of information within seconds. So like experiencing the arising and dissolving or the creation and the destruction of universes or multiple universes, or being able to have multi-dimensional perception from that vantage point. Like you're able to experience all the planes that you exist on once you actually have reached or have experienced cosmic consciousness. So here in our physical state right now, this is the one bandwidth, this is the one part of the spectrum that we're experiencing, this physical experience in this room. But imagine from like another vantage point or from the consciousness of the higher self, you're not only experiencing this room and this body, you're experiencing multiple bodies, multiple selves in horizontal distribution, so multiple places in time, multiple selves in time, and then also multiple dimensions of these selves. So not just this physical plane, but the astral, the mental, the causal. You can experience multiple realities. So a person who has this kind of multidimensional sight, they often describe it as they describe it as like a cosmic form of clairvoyance, or having the vision that the soul has, or having the capacity of sight that the higher self has. All the classic descriptions describe it as a formless cosmic consciousness. What was very compelling about Bob Monroe's discoveries and his path was that he not only described it in those terms of like a formless cosmic light, but he described a form-based version of this higher self, which was, he called them the XCOM, so executive committee. And when he reached his inner structures, he found that he found a terminal inside where he was able to see all of his previous moments of his life on a screen. So everything that he had experienced, like whether it was age 5 on a given day or age 21 on a given day, he was able to rewind to that moment and see it and re-experience it in full detail. He had the capacity to do this with all of his experiences in this current life. Another part of the structure was a bed of flowers. And when he would get close to the flower and actually look at the inside, he'd see a face. And if he would touch that face, he would reappear in that life as that person. And there were like a couple thousand of these flowers. So he saw all of his past, present, future, alternate selves, or like how the part of our inner structure where that is accessible. And finally, he encountered what he called the XCOM, or these super beings that managed and guided all the various incarnates in cyclical existence. So all of his other selves, or all the other selves that were in his cluster, like imagine, I can give an example. So let's say theoretically that all of us are actually the same soul, right? Like we have different appearances, but if we were to pull back the layers of the onion, it turns out that, we're all different. We're all flowers in that same flower bed. And this is distinctly our cluster compared to the guy across the street. He's in another cluster. He has his own set of flowers, and he has his own bed of flowers, and he's one of the flowers in the bed, right? So this is the idea that he's describing. What he finds out in the third book is that these selves are lost. Like they don't actually know, like most people, that we don't actually know that we're in this cyclical existence and that we existed previous to this incarnation, that will exist after. We have ignorance of that knowledge. So what Bob discovers is that these beings are attempting to wake up the incarnates that are in the cycle. So when people describe near-death experiences, or sometimes it occurs in OBEs, there's guides that appear that people describe, spirit guides, but these beings are, Bob described them as being above that. Like they don't actually generally come down to this dimension. They exist like behind the screen. So what I began to discover in my OBEs, and what has been triggering a lot of interest lately for me, is what I've been encountering is that there is, in the OBEs that I've been having, even if they're very strange, like I had an OBE, I said higher self now, started ascending through these dimensions. I ended up in some kind of in-between reality. So it was like a dimension between dimensions. It was very strange. There wasn't really any clear formations. The whatever enclosure I was in, it was kind of like a wavy, weird patterns of colors, and I saw this, even the way that form works in these dimensions is strange. Like I saw this kind of hexagonal spherical structure, and it was moving in multiple like it was simultaneously moving outward, parts of it, and other parts of it were simultaneously moving inward. Some parts of it were simultaneously moving in this direction, like this. So it was this oscillating geometrical formation, and there were a few of these in this particular place, and they were all moving around. And this voice asked me, "Where do you want to go now? Like, where would you like to? What teacher or what place or what dimension would you like to go to?" So I began asking, like, what is under the hood? You know, like, what is asking me, where do I want to go? Or when I direct my attention to a specific being or a specific place in an OBE, there's this massive force that actually comes behind you and transports you there. So where is this force coming from? Who is asking me, where do I want to go? Or, you know, one time recently I yelled in the OBE state, higher self now. But I yelled it like really loud. And immediately this voice said, "Hey, we can hear you. You know, like you don't need to yell. We're right here." So it feels like a movie set where all of these situations and dramas and occurrences are occurring on the set, but there are these directors behind the set that are saying, "Hey, do this," you know. That's what it was. That's the feeling I'm beginning to get in the OBEs and what I'm beginning to perceive, that there's actually a reality or a structure behind the one that you're immediately perceiving, and that there are intelligences in that structure that are trying to communicate with you. So, in the desert it was one of the nights. It's like a couple nights after the whole tent was destroyed, and I went back out there and I had the car, and it was really strange. Usually, you know, when I make a decision, there's not another part of my mind that like backtracks it, right? I don't have doubt when I decide, okay, I'm going to stay here for the night, and that's going to be the case. I'm just going to sleep there, you know. I'm going to stay. I stayed at mental physics for the day, did my 6 hours of meditation in the vortex. Okay, I'm going to drive to Joshua Tree National Park, go to some remote part of the park and sleep, right? No problem. So I tried doing that. I go to the park and I just couldn't get comfortable. I couldn't get settled. I was like, this is so weird. I mean, why do I feel like I shouldn't be here right now? I just had this weird feeling. Like, this is strange. So I drive out of the parking lot, go all the way back to out of the Joshua Tree National Park to the city of Joshua Tree. I tried sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. Okay. I sleep for an hour and then I wake up and I can't go back to sleep. And I'm like, Jesus, like this is terrible. You know, I'm like trying to rest. I have all this meditation to do tomorrow. My day is going to be shot if I don't have, you know, at least a few hours of sleep. So I decided to drive, back towards LA. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna drive back towards the city or back towards LA. And if I get tired enough, I'll just pull over and fall asleep. One of my things is I get sleepy while driving. And I know that's really bad, but it's just a thing that I experience. If I drive for long enough, or if I'm not awake enough and I get in a car and I start driving, for sure, it's going to start to knock me out. So I thought that driving would help, right? And then I could go to sleep. And so I start driving, waiting for the sleep to kick in. And then I pass the Joshua Tree like city limit. It's probably like 30 minutes, 25-minute drive from the mental physics center. And then boom, I get all these mental impressions of the original desert that I was staying at. And it was like burned in my mind, you know, like very, very clear image that would not leave my mental attention. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to keep driving for 5 minutes. If this image doesn't go away, I'm going to turn around. so I'm driving. The image doesn't go away. I turn around. I go back to Walmart, try to sleep again. I think I slept for maybe like 40 minutes or something. And then I'm awake again. I'm like, okay, I need to drive again to get sleepy again. So I drive back out to the city limit, try to get past it. The image comes into my mind again for a second time. This feeling that I can't leave, this feeling that I have to go back. So I turn the car around and I go back. Oh my God. I might have done this a third time. I don't even remember it at this point. It's really weird. By now I'm like getting delirious, you know? So I finally doing this back and forth nonsense. It's like 5 in the morning at this point. I go to the mental physics center that opens at 7 o'clock and I just park my car in front of the vortex and I fall asleep in the parking lot. Okay. So I'm sleeping and I have this simulation dream. I didn't know I wasn't lucid in the dream at first. I was just having a simulation dream and it was some kind of, repetitive course. And by the end of it, I'm with this girl in the kind of recording studio looking like place. And I'm telling her, like, why does this keep happening? I mean, I'm trying to understand here. How is it that this dream is repeating itself? I mean, this is happening exactly as it just happened. I don't understand. Like, what is this, you know? But I still didn't have enough lucidity to know that I was dreaming. Like, I didn't have that like actual moment of, I'm having a lucid dream. You know, I just sensed that like this environment, this this moment or this reality is somehow repeating itself, and it just doesn't make any sense that it's repeating itself. I literally told the girl, this is happening all over again, exactly as it just happened. How is this happening? She presses a button, ding, and I become lucid. Like she presses a button, lucidity turns on, I enter some kind of transitional in between state, weird lights, colors, weird stuff. And what happens next is one of the strangest OBEs I've ever had. I literally couldn't tell if I was having an OBE or if I just consciousness transferred into the body of an astronaut. I couldn't tell at first. I was like, but I just appear in this reality and the walls had these kind of like, had this like matte feeling and these concave or these little dome like bubbles coming out. So it really felt like a space station. And in front of me, I see this kind of, small little, it was like a mini version of the NASA shuttle, the white one with the black bottom. It was like a mini souped up futuristic version of that. It looked pretty cool actually. And in front of me was, of course, the screen. The mainframe screen, the screen that has been haunting my OBEs for 2 years. And I go up to the screen and it speaks to me. And, you know, I say, as I usually do, what the fuck is this? Right? What is this? And it just says, um, you've now become an agent of your, it's interesting because it was communicating with me and then my mind was translating that into English. Like it was sending me impulses and I had to decode them into language for me to understand or to communicate with it. And it actually, at one point my perceptions got a lot, like my perception in that state phased out, like the whole screen went gray, like a TV screen, like the old TV screens, you know, like all the static and it's gray and I thought I had lost the OBE at that point, but then the voice, the guidance, the guiding intelligence said, don't try to see with your eyes, see with your mind. And I remembered that place in my mind's eye. And by recalling and reconstructing it mentally, I was able to regain all perceptions in that state. And then the screen turned on, or there was like some mist behind the screen. It was very like stars and mist in the screen, and it just said, "Congratulations, you've become an agent of yourself, or whatever that is, or whatever whatever this structure is. And yeah, and then I woke up in my body after that. It was one of the most, I wouldn't describe it as real. I would describe it as hyper real, ultra real. It was like the level of, realness was increased like 10 notches. That's why I couldn't tell. I thought I had maybe appeared in the body of an astronaut or something like that. It was just very, very physically real. So my OBEs now, I'm beginning to experience and explore what this guiding intelligence in the OBE state is. Like if this cosmic consciousness true self is like on a very high formless plane, I'm suspecting that there's intermediary planes between that cosmic consciousness and our embodied aspects of ourselves. Or for example, even the causal body is still form based, but as soon as you get beyond that, you get to what Theosophists call a Buddhic body. And at that point, it's formless and it experiences nature as non-local. But the causal is still generally described as being form-based realities, although they're quite different from this one. So that is what happened on the retreat, at least as far as the OBEs were concerned. And with the meditation though, since I was meditating 6 hours, 8 hours, sometimes 10 hours a day, I really began to discover that, when the mind gets quiet enough, like you generally don't experience this because your senses are too engaged with the world and you're too busy and there's just not enough stillness rolling. There's not enough stillness present to cause or to be a fuel for some of these samadhi or entry to samadhi states. And when I began to experience, I wouldn't call it samadhi, but probably like pre samadhi, the stillness is so strong. It's so pervasive. It's so deep that it shuts off the senses. Like when you actually enter an absorption, you don't know, you don't have any mental processes that are running while you're in it. So like you can't analyze, you can't use the discriminatory functions of consciousness. You can't, the normal processes that you use of like shifting your attention, from the meditation object to your body, or like your mind wandering from one thing to another, or you considering, or, thinking, or having feeling tones that are like, that become thoughts. All of that is gone. It's not accessible because the stillness is so deep. In these deeper recesses or these deeper parts of mind, like I've described before, these states are non-volitional. As soon as you enter them, volition is not something that can arise until you emerge from it. So you're meditating, and the bliss is getting very strong, or like the unification is getting very strong, or the stillness and the silence is getting very deep. And then it just, like, your mental activity just flatlines. Nothing's happening. You don't even really know that it's a deep, peaceful state until after the fact, when you can have that thought. Because besides that, it's so quiet that the parts of your mind that can acknowledge an experience as peaceful, or that can acknowledge an experience as this or that doesn't start to work again until you've come out of stillness that is at that depth. So it's kind of like, I've never gone deep sea diving, but I've gone into water, and you notice that the further you go into water, the more intense the pressure is on your body. In meditation, the deeper you go, the more intense the stillness is, and the intensity of that stillness actually shuts off your senses. So when you go deep, your capacity to think is gone. Your capacity to feel the body is gone. Your breath is gone. The shifting nature of attention is gone. All of that stops. And there's just hyper awareness. and very, very deep tranquility. In Buddhism, these are called jhanas, and they're considered, the Buddha called them stages or stations of cessation. In traditional Theravada, there's 9. So there's the first jhana, the second, third, fourth, the formless attainments, all the way to a 9th state called the cessation of perception and feeling. So from your first samadhi all the way to your 9th, at least in Theravada Buddhism, this is a gradual cessation, like a gradual thinning, a gradual deepening of very, very profound levels of stillness, to the point where by the time you're at cessation of perception and feeling, consciousness actually vanishes and it turns off completely. So yeah, it was very clear that to the reason that people do retreats for these, like anapanasati, or you're using a meditation object like the kasina. For me, I was doing Dhammakaya, so the Dhammakaya object is classified as the white kasina in the commentaries. It's a sphere of light. The reason that generally people say, like, yeah, for you to experience absorption, it's best that you go into retreat, is really for that reason. When I was in the desert, the sense perceptions are very loud. The wind is smacking against the tent. You're very uncomfortable. You're trying to survive. You're trying to make it through the night because it's so cold. All of this is actually not the most conducive for samadhi, for absorption. The less that you can deal with, the less that you can use your mind, the better. That's the thing that I discovered too, and we'll start the meditation now. I know I've talked a lot. When you are becoming familiar with meditation, and one of the things you discover was, like, you don't actually have to use your mind. Like, you don't have to talk to yourself. Like, that's a habit that we have, to always be thinking and to always be planning and to always be engaged in this kind of internal dialogue with ourselves. That is not something that has to be done. You don't have to do that. Like, if you want, you can just turn it off. So when you're on a meditation retreat and you start to experience more stillness, you begin to see it like, oh, actually stillness is a layer of consciousness, or it's a layer of experience that is right underneath the stream and the constant flow of thought and internal dialogue. And if I just sink into that stream, I don't actually have to think. So that's one of the profound benefits of doing a retreat or doing intensive practice. You begin to experience more of what's available on your spectrum of consciousness and of experience. Like, right now, many of us may be oriented towards, like, if we just looked at our mind, it's thinking, it's talking all the time. It doesn't actually have to do that. So it can be by repeatedly diving or repeatedly relaxing into this witnessing state, or into just being aware, you'll see that the mental dialogue or the internal dialogue, it runs when you're distracted. But if you're actually aware and you're just being present and lucid in your ordinary life, you'll find that the mental content and the mental dialogue is less. And there's ways to actually, I mean, for me, if I just completely relax it and I'm aware, it doesn't run. Like, it won't talk. Also, if you can try this, if you're interested in this particular thing, you can listen to your inner voice, like your inner they call it internal sub-vocalization. That's the actual, like, term for this inner talk. If you actually just relax and you listen to it, it stops. Like, the aspect of your consciousness that listens and the aspect of your consciousness that talks all the time, these are like two parts of the same structure. So if you actually are attentive with listening to this inner dialogue, it stops very quickly. For me, it stops immediately. And I've done this with kids, and it doesn't work for everyone. Maybe people's minds or brains are different, but I've tried this with a lot of kids that I teach, and it actually works. Like, yeah, just listen to your, that inner voice you have that's always talking, judging, commenting. Just like stop and like intently, gently listen to it and tell me what happens. And a lot of times they say, hey, it gets pretty quiet. That's really weird. So you can begin to walk in this quiet or begin to experience more of this quiet. I was attempting on the retreat to wash dishes while being quiet. Initially we're using some intention, right? We're directing the mind, and then later, or once you become more familiar with it, you don't actually have to do anything. You can just relax and the mind will be pretty silent. So, first couple of times I was washing my stuff. It didn't work, but gradually I was able to become more accustomed to just walking in relaxation and silence. Um, yeah, washing the things I was eating out of, or just having more of the silence integrated with activity. Yeah. So, final point, since all of us have been doing lucid dreaming, and right now I'll post the video for it. You can do if you haven't done focus 10, we can do focus 10 today. Um, you want to gradually increase your lucidity in waking life. What does that mean? It means like when you're in a dream and you become lucid, you actually have the thought and the awareness. I'm lucid. This is a dream right now. I know that I'm dreaming. Fantastic. I could do anything. So you go from unconscious to conscious. You go from not having awareness to having awareness. Lucid living, or having this awareness during the day, is really critical to having the awareness at night. So being able to, having the capacity to be aware outside of meditation is really essential to lucid dreaming. I mean, you can do, of course, reality checks, and these are all essential tools to like trigger that moment of lucidity. But if you're just very aware and mindful and awake and present in your waking life, that will translate over to the dreamscape. Why is it that people have more lucid dreams or OBEs on meditation retreats? Is because there's more awareness. There's more awakeness. There's more actual mindfulness in their day because of all the meditation that they're doing. And that translates over to being awake and being conscious in the dreamscape. That's really one of the main reasons that you have more of this when you do intensive practice. It's just because you have actual, you actually have more awareness during your day. So, what's an example of being lucid in your waking life? So, like, let's say I'm gonna go on a walk right now, and generally when I go on walks, I just think the whole time. Okay, like I'm just thinking about everything when you're going on this walk, and that's fine, whatever. But now you're turning the walk into a lucidity practice, into a mindfulness practice. You're going to go on that walk, but now you're going to intentionally relax, and you're going to be more, you're going to be observant. You're going to feel the sensations on the bottom of your feet. When your mind wanders, you're aware of it, but you're not engaging any mental planning. You're not engaging any internal dialogue. You're really just sitting back and you're observing. You're letting everything be. This is different than how you would be on your normal walks where you just talk to yourself the whole time and try to figure out whatever you want to do for the day. They're different, completely different things, okay? So So the way of, going on this mindful walk, that is increasing your lucidity. You may only have mindfulness and awareness for like 30 seconds at a time or 15 seconds at a time before your mind wanders. And then, you find yourself planning and then you're like, oh, okay, I'll come back to feeling the bottom of my feet or come back to observing and being aware. Yes, that's going to happen. It's a given. Your mind's going to wander. But gradually you develop more lucidity. Gradually you develop more mindfulness and more presence. And that begins to translate into the dream state. One of the things that happens when you become lucid is, if you're engaged in like controlling the dream, you can do all this like cool stuff and whatever. But if you're using the dream state as a way to experience presence and mindfulness, like you're using the dreamscape the same way that you would do a walking meditation right here across the street, going to the park, I've found that when you do that, the dreamscape shifts very quickly. As soon as you go very internal, the dreamscape will change or you'll become distracted the same way that your mind would become distracted in ordinary and waking life. So even in dreams, we're able to develop and refine our practice. And in the Tibetan model, they say that if you can do a given practice with the same level of clarity and proficiency in the dreamscape, then you've really mastered it. Like to do a meditation, our reality here is much more stable. Your meditation object will stay, with just much greater ease. If you transform into a deity, you can hold that visualization with a lot greater stability in this particular environment. If you try it in the dreamscape, you actually will become that deity, like you'll transform into it. But the ability for your attention to sustain that is, it's like that reality is there's a lot more fluctuations. It's more difficult to have your attention be sustained from one moment to the next in the dreamscape. So one of the markers in Tibetan Buddhism is if you could do your deity practice with the exact same clarity and stability in your waking life in the dreamscape, you've mastered that practice. If you can actually do guru yoga with the visualizations, the whole sequence, the whole process with the same moment to moment mindfulness in the waking state, you accomplish that in the dream, they consider that you've mastered that practice. So the instability of that environment is very clear once you've had some lucid dreams. Like for me, if I go into a lucid dream and I start meditating, like the dreamscape shifts immediately. Like I'll be here in a room like this, I start meditating, keep my mind on the meditation object, it's there for like a few seconds and then bam, it goes to another place, or like it's my mastery as far as dreamscape is concerned, like with the way that dream yogis really approach this and do their practices in the dreamscape. I'm definitely not at that level. So my capacity is more towards like OBEs and whatever. But the point was that lucidity is really what we're going for. In meditation, we're being aware. That's lucidity. In meditation, you're relaxing, you're being aware. From one moment to the next, you're developing lucidity. And that is essential for the dreamscape, for lucid dreams in general. Of course, there's lots of lucid dreaming techniques and dream yoga techniques, and these are all inductions, right? They're all practices that help you get into that state. But once you're in that state, the mindfulness and the lucidity is really critical, because otherwise you'll just pop out. So gradually, the more you experience a given state, the more mindfulness you're able to actually exercise, or you're able to experience in that state. The more familiar you become and the more stable that reality becomes, and your recall improves. So